Morning, everyone. So, every Sunday when I'm going to speak, I try to find a theme or I try to think of something topical to talk about. And today's April 1st, April Fool's Day. So I thought I'd bring out a new game show. It's a new Buddhist game show. I've been working on this for a long time. And I wanted to kind of introduce it a little bit. We mentioned in the Eightfold Path that it's important to follow the teachings of the Buddha, but sometimes it's difficult and confusing because there's a lot of Buddhism in popular culture, and it's confusing to figure out what's authentic and not authentic. And a lot of the things I thought the Buddha said, I found out he never said. And then I've noticed some members of our Sangha who've been practicing for 40 years, they get confused because they hear things on the internet and it doesn't quite sound like what they've heard at OCBC. And so it's very confusing. So this talk, I forgot to mention this at Vista, but this talk is almost entirely off the internet. These are all things you can find on the internet. And there's actually a website called Fake Buddhist Quotes. And they list all the quotes, the things the Buddha never said, and some of them are my favorites, right? I was like kind of mortified. I'm like, but I like that one. So, it's not that they're not good quotes. It's just that he never said them. And so, I think it's important as Buddhists that we kind of know the difference. So the game show call is called Fake or Fact. So this is the theme music. And then I was able to get a sponsor for this new pilot that I'm working on. This show is sponsored by, I can't believe it's not Buddha. It sounds like Buddha, but it's not. So this came from fakebuddhaquotes.com. And, this is a real, I didn't make any of these, right? I just go to Google and I just grab an image and I put it in my PowerPoint. So at Vista, everybody thought that I made all this up and I created it from scratch, but this is all right off the internet. Remember, I always tell you that if it's on the internet, it has to be true. And before we get started, I also wanted to mention that I want to make sure that I'm accurate too. And this is, I had this quote that I've been using a lot, and I thought, well, maybe I should find out who said it and make sure it's not one of the fake quotes. So there's a famous scholar named Jan Nattier. She was at the University of Indiana, but I think now she's at Berkeley. She said that put together in book form, the Buddhist scriptures contained in only the Chinese canon, which is smaller than the Japanese canon, alone would amount to some 500,000 pages in English. So the Buddha taught for 45 years. It's 500,000 pages. So, if you read 10,000 pages a year for 50 years, you could read this, but it's in Chinese. So, most of the texts aren't translated yet. So one of the problems we have is it's hard to track down a Buddhist quote, right? It's such a wide net. It's very difficult to just go look it up real quickly and say, no, he didn't say that. And I think as it gets retold, it kind of carries on a life of its own. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, I've gotten kind of good at this. There's a lot of these quotes on Facebook, and I've been studying Buddhism for a long time now. And I didn't read 500,000 pages, but this is one of my favorite books. It's 850, which sounds like a lot, but it's way less than 500,000. I read like maybe 10 pages a night for a year, or whatever that adds up to. But anyway, this is an anthology of all the Buddha's teachings. So it's like scholars took 500,000 pages and kind of condensed it down into an editable morsel. And so this starts with his birth. It goes through all the Pali canon, Mahayana canon. The larger sutra appears in here. They don't call it out, but you read it as like a historical novel. And they've lined everything up by chronology. And it reads like, the life story of the Buddha, and it ends with his death. And I read this so much that I may be giving myself too much credit, but when I hear a quote from the Buddha now, I can kind of tell if it sounds fishy or not. Because I've read this, and it just sounds odd to me. Like I'll tell Linda, I don't think he said that. That doesn't sound, I mean, I didn't read 500,000 pages, but I read 850. It doesn't sound like something he would say. And this technique works well. I had a professor at El Camino College in Torrance before I transferred to UCLA. He was a physics professor. And what I did really well in his class. When he gave us a test, it either was a mathematical formula question, like figure out the force and friction at this point on an angled slope or something. And because I was a math major, I didn't really know the physics that well. I just crunched the math. So if you're really good at math, I've told you this before, you can get through chemistry and physics by just relying on your math skills. So I was able to get those questions right. But then he would also ask multiple choice once in a while. And a lot of times I wasn't sure what the answer was. So the trick is you get rid of the two that you are positive or wrong, and then there's maybe 3 left. And I would read them to myself, and I would see them in my mind, and it just didn't sound like something he would say. Do you know what I mean? Like I'd read each answer, and I would kind of pick the one that sounded most authentically like Professor Tom Wilson would say. And I looked it up on the internet. He also taught for 45 years. So he was like my Buddha for physics. He taught from 1950 to 1995. So this technique works well. So we're going to go to our first quote. I was going to bring kids up here on chairs, but it's not fair. So this might be a little hard to read, but this is a quote off the internet. The trouble is, you think you have time. Pretty good, pretty good. So you have to decide, did he say this, or is this a Hallmark People magazine? So you can think a little bit. Okay. So I didn't make this slide. This is off the internet. So this is the Buddha answering back to Facebook. So this slide comes from fake Buddha quotes. Surprisingly, he never said this. Maybe he should have said it, but he never said it. Okay, this is another one. The thought manifests as the word manifests as the deed develops into a habit, and the habit hardens into character. So watch the thought and its ways with care, and let it spring from love, born out of concern for all beings. This quote is very interesting. I'll tell you why later. So this is also fake. And what's interesting about this quote is I've actually used a quote almost identical to this one in my intro class, but it's from they're not sure, they have trouble sourcing this quote, but they think it was from an American philosopher in the 1800s. So, it has nothing to do with Buddhism. It's from an 18th century American philosopher. They reworded it to make it sound a little bit more foreign, but it's not a quote from the Buddha. Doubt everything, find your own light. So this quote is really, really popular in America because we are an individualistic country, right? We're individuals. We tend to not like to join groups. A lot of people are suspicious of organized religion. And I always tell people, if you're fearful of organized religion, you should become Buddhist. Because we're not very organized. I mean that as a compliment. It's a compliment. So I was surprised he didn't say this one. I thought he said that one. So this one is also fake. So this is the one that I did on my own. I threw this in here because I wanted to have one that, well, you'll see. So there's a disciple of the Buddha named Sakaka who asked the Buddha whether the Buddha had ever taken a nap during the day. So this is kind of a big deal. This happens early on In this book, actually, I went and looked it up because I just don't want to have, I would hate to misquote in my own talk about misquotes. But it's on page 280, so it's early on in the book. The Buddha's become a Buddha. At 35, he realizes enlightenment. And they're asking him about his ascetic practices between 29 and 35. So the Buddha, on this page, talks about how extremely disciplined he was with ascetic practices. Not eating, not sleeping. He was really, really an extreme during his ascetic practice period of his life. So this disciple asks the Buddha, did you ever take a nap during the day during this rigorous ascetic practice? And to this, the Buddha admitted, Sakaka, it was around the end of summer, right after a meal, I folded my robe into four and resting on my side, took a nap. And the Buddha said, taking a nap during the day cannot be called either indulgence nor non-indulgence. So it's neither positive nor negative. And when I found this, I was so happy. And I showed it to Linda. I said, how great is this religion? I have doctrinal proof. I had to read 850 pages, but I found the nugget. It's perfectly fine to take naps whenever you want in our religion. You're not being lazy. It's perfectly fine. So I got this off the internet. It says, I never said 99.9% of the things the internet writes on my picture. This one's true. This one's true. So it took me a long time to find this in the book. So what happens, I think, a lot is you read something the Buddha said, but then it's very frustrating. You can't find it. So the 500,000 pages thing I was able to track down. I had to Google. You have to Google just the right thing to find it. So I Googled for like 20 minutes, and I finally found Jane Nadir. And then this, I had to just get my book out in my office and just turn page by page. I couldn't find the book. I couldn't search the book online. So this one I had to just do on my own. And I do try to source my quotes a lot from the IBS training. I'm not a scholar, but I really try to quote the author, quote the book, quote the page. So here's another one. This one is incredibly popular in America. We tend to be scientific and rational and logical, and this quote really appeals to Americans. Believe nothing, no matter where you read it or who said it, no matter if I have said it, unless it agrees with your own reason and your own common sense. So that one's fake. This is probably the most famous quote that's fake. It's the one where the Buddha says, trust your own instincts. If it doesn't resonate with you, throw it away. Try it out, be objective. Some people have said that this was the Buddha proclaiming the scientific method, right? Which is 2,000 years too soon. So there's a very famous essay on the internet called Lost in Quotation, and it's by this Buddhist monk. His name is Thanissaro Bhikkhu, and that's his Dharma name, right? Like his real name's probably Larry Smith. But no, I'm serious, but this is his Dharma name. And I don't know, we all look the same. We all have glasses and we have no hair. So he wrote this essay August 29th, 2012 in Access to Insight. So you can find this on the internet. So this quote comes from what they call the Kalama Sutra. And I went and when I was looking for the nap quote, I stumbled across the Kalama Sutra quote in here as well. And I kind of said that the Kalama people, they were a tribe, kind of like the Shakya tribe the Buddha came from. There was a Kalama tribe. I had thought they were cynical and suspicious of teachers because they're overwhelmed by too many experts. But they weren't cynical or suspicious. They were confused. That's a lot different. They were confused, and it's almost like today where you have Oprah Winfrey, Tony Robbins, Wayne Dyer, Eckhart Tolle, everybody's telling you, what you should do and how you should do it, you get confused and you don't know who to listen to. So what this monk says is that if you look at the entire passage in the Kalama Sutra, you discover that these quotes give only part of the picture. The Buddha's skepticism toward reliable authorities extends inside as well as out. So this is a case where the Buddha did say something like this, but they cut out the part that doesn't appeal to an American audience. And so that's a misquotation as well. You lose context. So this yellow part is what is removed. So this is the Buddha speaking. So in this case, Kalamas, don't go by reports, by legend, by traditions, by scripture, by logical deduction, by inference, by analogies, by agreement through pondering views, by probability, or by the thought, this contemplative is our teacher. So the way he explains it is even when judging the results of your own actions, you can't simply take your own ideas of what works as trustworthy standard. After all, you can easily side with your greed, aversion, or delusion, setting your standards too low. So to check against this tendency, the Buddha recommends that you also take into consideration the views of the wise, for you'll never grow until you allow your standards to be challenged by theirs. So, it's kind of a good thing to hear teachings that you don't agree with, because they challenge the way you think, and it's offering a new way or a new path. And I've talked about this before. Teague became a lifeguard, and Emily became a musical theater person. And I watched very, very closely how they were trained. And they would seek out teachers that were accomplished in their field, that were good at what they did, and they wanted to follow those people. And Teague and Emily never really understood the training they were doing. They didn't understand the drills, but they had faith in the teacher. And what the monk is going to suggest is this is the way we learn through apprenticeship. So you find somebody that you can apprentice under, and they train you in a craft, and you become a master at it over time. And so it's not really a good idea to say to a master carpenter, I don't see why we hammer nails this way. It doesn't make sense to me. It seems wrong. I would do it another way. And it's like, yeah, that's why you're not a carpenter. And that's why I'm the master carpenter. See, that's the difference, is you think you should do it the wrong way, and I'm trying to teach you how to do it the right way. And it's not because of any special gift or inherent qualities. It's because the master had also learned from his master. So he says, this is simply the way we have to operate when developing any kind of skill. Your appreciation of good carpentry, for example, grows as you master carpentry yourself. And the Buddha is making the point that this is how to approach the Dharma. As a skill to be mastered, as with any skill, your inner sensitivity and assurance as to who's truly wise in the skill grows only through your own willingness to learn. So I just wanted to mention that a lot of people, well, not a lot of people, but I've heard people say it's important to become a member of OCBC. And a lot of times that sounds like Costco, right? Or American Express. And I think American Express even says, with membership comes privilege. Or somebody says that. Or they should say it. Maybe I'm misquoting. So people would like to know, if you become a member, what do you get? Do you get cheaper prices on books? Do you get better parking spaces? Do you get preferred seating in the Hondo? And somebody told me, no, what you get is access to the Buddha, to the Dharma, and to the Sangha. That's what you get. And I thought that was really deep, because it's really hard in America to get access to authentically represented Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And most of what I read on the internet, a lot of the books at Barnes & Noble, they're an approximation of Buddhism, and you could argue that they're not wrong, and maybe they're a good stepping stone. But it's really important to be able to kind of get through the noise and be able to find an authentically represented tradition like OCBC. And I think we're really lucky to be able to do that here. It's very difficult and very, very easy to get confused if you try to practice Buddhism on your own. And I've kind of done a study lately about why did I have so much trouble understanding Buddhism. And I kind of feel better now. I wasn't slow. I don't lack spiritual depth. It's that I'm being overwhelmed by these fake Buddhist quotes on the internet. And then I'd come to church, and it's like, well, that's not what it said on Facebook, you know? But Reverend Harada is a master carpenter. And so to be able to have access, personal access, to be able to train and practice and get something that goes back 2,500 years, I think we're all very, very lucky, and it's a very precious resource. And, you know, like we say, hard is it to be born a human, and now I live it, and hard is it to hear the teachings. That word hard and difficult, it means rare. It means really rare. It is very rare to be born in Orange County and be able to have a temple like this to go to. And I actually didn't want to take a job out of state because I didn't want to leave OCBC. It's that important to me, right? We're very lucky to have this resource. So I just wanted to let you know, if you read things on the internet and it doesn't sound like Buddhism to you, that's good. I think you studied very well. So I just wanted to show you these April Fool's jokes, and you're more than welcome to go home this afternoon and take a long nap, which I will be doing. These talks take a lot out of me. Please join me in Gasho. Namo Amidavats. Naman Davats. Naman Davats. Thank you very much.